Welcome to today's lecture on economic rights of women in early India. We were discussing about the several aspects of lives of women in early India. We have already discussed the socio-political, cultural and the art forms, the several art forms and the kind of gender identity that one can understand by considering all these varied aspects. In today's lecture, we would be talking about the kind of changes that came about as there was a transition from the tribal society of the Rig Vedic period towards the state and the proto-state formation of later Vedic and the post-Vedic period onwards. After the Aryans had conquered the major portion of northern Indian land tract, they had a steady supply of inexpensive and regular supply of slaves. Before, women of the family largely assisted their menfolk in several outdoor activities. Hence, their economic role was much more active, and they were recognized as a part of the productive system, and the same is indicated in several hymns of the Rig Vedic period also. As India was primarily an agricultural country, women were needed in large numbers to assist the menfolk in several seasonal activities. India since was made up of thousands and several villages, so it was the family and not an individual that was the basic unit of production. And since women played a very important role being in the family, so therefore their productive role also could not be glossed over. Usually 3 generations of the family lived together in an essentially patriarchal structure, and the work was clearly divided on those lines. Several poems written by Tamil women in the south indicate that how while singing they were also working, and how they were also spending time with their children while they were performing several tasks. And these poems also indicate the role played by aristocracy in channelizing the energies of these women. Some women could be seers and some could be courtesans and prostitutes, and all these wide varieties of women played a very important role as far as the material milieu was concerned. However, one cannot disregard the issue of deprivation with reference to women. The deprivation of ancient Indian women from earning, from possessing or from disbursing money, then also from selling, mortgaging or donating what was rightfully there is a reality that cannot be glossed over. There were several changes in position of women from later Vedic period onwards, and there was one tendency, and that was of discrimination, which began and which became a routine practice from later Vedic period onwards, whether it was in the field of education or in the field of property rights or several other facilities. There were some practices also that further deteriorated the lives of women, like child marriage, widow burning, the parda, polygamy. These were the practices that gradually became the norms, and they worsened a woman's position, and especially with reference to the higher castes, these practices became more and more visible. The epics and the Puranas, they came to equate women with property, and there are several references that have indicated this change. Now, as so many evil practices were emerging, one can now talk about the historical evolution and growing complexity that was also emerging along with. So, if one talks about the Mauryan period, though the Mauryan kings often employed female bodyguards, spies, Istri Dhyaksha, Mahamatras, however, their status was far from equal. So, only on the basis of such employment one cannot conclude that women had equal rights. Arthashastra imposed more stigmas on women, as Kautilya dismissed women's liberation, and they were not free even to go anywhere without husband's permission. So, even if a woman had to visit her parents' house, it was mandatory to take permission. So, one can clearly talk about a narrative of decline in the position of women, and this position became worse off during the Gupta period. There are number of Smriti Shastras that have clearly abused women, and apart from child marriage and sati, prostitution and devdasi system became clearly widespread. Now, it was in this background that if we consider the issue of a widow's property rights, what emerges is that once the woman lost her husband, society began to look down upon her as a financial liability and a menace for society. In a largely agricultural society where the concept of joint family was the norm, the threat of dividing the cultivable land owned by the family was very real, and hence specific rules came to be devised in order to avoid this situation. Now, this division of land could happen if at the husband's death the land came into the hands of the widow. If the widow remarried and her new husband was to be given her share of the land, this would mean loss of land from the original family. Such situations were objectionable to other brothers of the dead husband. So, most of the lawmakers stipulated that the widow should be burnt alive along with the corpse of her husband, and here therefore was the beginning of the sati system. Or even if she was allowed to live at all, the lawgivers made her life a living death sentence by enforcing severe norms of chastity with no economic security. So, the whole issue of widow remarriage needs to be understood from this standpoint. As has been described by Parashar, a widow came to be described as a punarbhu. Punarbhu meant one who forfeits her rights to her husband's property. So, once the husband died, automatically her right to property was vanquished. Now, in the area largely controlled by the Daya Bhag rules, widows could inherit husband's property, which they could not do in the areas which were under Mitakshara rules. The economic problem of widows was considerably complicated by polygamy and by the social weightage that was given to the mother of a male child. Widows with daughters only or childless widows suffered economically, socially, and generally had to fall back either on their parents or their brothers, because in any case life for them at their in-laws' place was it was unbearable due to several moral codes that had been imposed from time to time. At their in-laws' places, they were looked down upon as an imposed liability. Several smritis upheld the widow's claim to maintenance. However, some only talked about bare subsistence that should be given to a widow. Now, coming to the next important issue related to the status of women, and that is rape. What was the lawmaker's attitude towards a rapist? A master raping a maidservant was treated rather leniently. As has been mentioned by Yajnavalkya, a man was supposed to pay 10 panas for raping a maidservant, whereas if a religious mendicant or a nun was raped, then the fine was to be increased to 24 panas. So clearly there was discrimination as to the category of woman who was raped. The position of women in society rendered her extremely vulnerable to a man's lust, and such men, with the connivance of the lawgivers and with the social sanction that had been accorded to them, went their own ways, and hence most of the time the rapist would go free. And there is a wide variety of literature also which conveys the same. Besides, laws and customs were so lenient in any case to upper caste men that women of the so-called lower castes were easily available without any payment. So, with these kind of discriminatory practices existing and going unabated, there was no looking back for the rapist. Now, coming to the issue of unchaste wives, there is a wide variety of literature which showed that fallen wives were cursed or they were punished, they could be abandoned, and they could even be killed. And capital punishment was definitely preferred for such wives. A false wife should be kept imprisoned in a room on an allowance of daily sustenance. So this was the kind of philosophy that was prevalent, and even Earth Shastra has a number of references that indicate this kind of a behavior. Then a wife who was violating the duties of chastity underwent penance, and she was to be kept under guard, and she was to be given only limited quantity of food. Now, the issue of an adulterous woman also was discussed in great detail. Such a woman was to lose her authority over the servants of the house, and she was supposed to wear dirty clothes. She was to be given very bare minimum of food for survival, and if she conceived from another man, then the husband had all the right to drive her away. Then another lawgiver, Vasishtha, has mentioned on adultery that if the wives of the three upper castes committed adultery with the lower sections of society, then they had to be driven away. And if the wife tried to kill the husband or the instructor, then also she was to be driven away, and she could also be given capital punishment. Gautama further laid down that if wife of the three upper castes committed adultery, then she could be devoured by gods. So that was the kind of harsh punishment that was awaiting such women. However, we also have references to several women donors. So for example, Shatapatha Brahmana, an 8th to 7th century BCE text, says that the wife had no property rights, nor had she any right over her own body. But still, there were several women donors in a society, and it was not only queens, but Buddhist and Jain ascetics. For example, the female Jaina disciple of Jayasena, then the female disciple of Pushyamitra, Dharam Soma, then the wife of a caravan leader or kocha, and a female lay disciple of several ascetics gave various kinds of alms and gifts to several Jain masters as well as to temples. Then the gift of a groove by the courtesan Amrapali is also mentioned in some sources. Then Anantha Pindika's daughter was the one who fed Buddha and thousands of his disciples. So we do have references to such women donors who not only shared their wealth and their riches with those who were in need, but also had a religious bent of mind, and so they went ahead with this decision making process. Then there were several gifts that were made by courtesans and other Buddhist women who donated to monasteries, chaityas, viharas, groves. Then they also contributed in construction of several public works like the bridges, wells, ponds, and also gave money. During the 5th century AD, Chandragupta's second daughter, Queen Prabhavati, gave rich grants of land which have been recorded in 3 of her very important inscriptions. Similarly, the Bhaumika dynasty in Orissa has listed 6 queens out of a total of 17 kings, and how these queens they used to grant to several brahmanas as well as temples. Now there were women from the royal or the noble or merchant families who could and did make grants from their own istridhan. So a woman's istridhan was several times utilized by her in order to give grants, as that was the only wealth over which she had her exclusive right. At time these donations were made in the name of pious, powerful, or even royal women. However, in most of the cases, the names of women donors were either missed intentionally or they were not mentioned. During 2nd century BCE, Vatsyayan indicated about women who were, they were maidens and also the prostitutes. He addressed both of them and suggested that women should dress up richly and attractively, because ultimately women are commodity, and a commodity is in demand only if they are good to look at or they are attractive. So with this kind of attitude that was developing in society, one now can talk about the role played by Ganikas in this entire material milieu that was evolving. There were rich Ganikas who ran their own establishments, and they were the owners of wealth which they earned after paying a stipulated amount of tax to the state. So the courtesan who earned her own wealth, sometimes that wealth was so much that even the merchants, etc., they used to borrow from that courtesan, and so these courtesans got a chance to invest in several opportunities. Arthashastra has also included a very valuable information on the organization of the institution of courtesans, the Ganika, who was allowed a suitable establishment and was recognized by the state as a valid activity. She was expected to entertain visitors according to the king's advice, and any kind of refusal to obey the king in this respect meant severe punishments. The state employed them as spies, and Ganikas were completely under state control. There was probably a distinction between the Ganikas inside and the Ganikas outside the palace, between the Ganikas as well as the ordinary prostitutes. Coming to the ceremonial functions of the courtesans, Arthashastra has indicated that the Ganikas were to carry an umbrella, the royal umbrella, as well as the golden pitcher and a fan whenever the king was seated in the royal vehicle or the throne and the chariot. So with this kind of importance that was given to Ganikas, their duties were, however, of wide variety. A pleasure-loving society is mirrored in several works of literature, and this also can help us in further genderization of early Indian history. So, if one goes through the contemporary drama, the narrative literature as well as the verse literature, then what emerges is that where there was a sense of moral guilt which often prompted women to spend substantial portions of their wealth in religious enterprises. Apart from these exceptions, the ordinary maids or housewives or widows were completely under the control of the men of their families, because their labor at home, however heavy, was not regarded as productive, and as has been discussed earlier, they were considered as a burden. Now, this story of Madhavi further highlights the fact that I just mentioned, that how women came to be considered as a commodity, a commodity that could be used to pay off one's debt. So, there was Galava who was unable to procure fees for his preceptor, and there was King Yayati who needed some kind of a escape from the difficult situation that he had been in. So, King Yayati pleaded, and he explained to the person from whom he had borrowed money that his treasury was depleted. He could not really pay back his loan. And what did he offer Galava? He offered Galava an option that of her very young and beautiful daughter. So, he kind of offered the daughter could be borrowed and lent out to kings for a year until Yayati or until the person who would acquire that daughter had a son by her, and this was how his loan was to be paid back. So, therefore, Galava was given this option of lending his daughter to 4 kings in succession for a year each, until he raised enough money to pay his fees for the preceptor. Now, neither Yayati nor Galava nor the 4 kings found this proposal as immoral or as a heinous crime towards a young woman. And it was only Madhavi who expressed her profound disgust at this whole affair, and she kind of declined to marry. She had been used as a lucrative chattel, and her innermost soul revolted at this, and she ultimately took penance. Now, this is just a mythological story probably, but it indicates the kind of dimension that was emerging, which was probably making women as the personal property of the father or the husband. Now, this theme of exclusive possession was becoming all the more visible because women had no economic independence. She could not hold property on her own right, and on the other hand, she was herself equal to a piece of property and rather an exclusive possession of the male members of the family. Her own property and earnings, if there could be any, would largely pool into the family property and the income of the husband, and that too could be acquired at any point of time. Then Harishchandra in the Puranic narrations could sell away his wife Chandramati, and several Buddhist Jataka stories also have spoken of several wives like Maddi who were sold to the Brahmins to be domestic servants because they were unable to pay back or they were unable to fulfill the promises that they had probably done. So, because of this custom that was prevalent in the society, the property dimension of a woman or the woman being the sole property of the male head of the family cannot be negated. There are some exceptions, however. Megasthenes has mentioned the Pandya women who were running the administration. Then there was the Satvahana queen Nayanika who ruled the kingdom on behalf of her minor son. Then I have already discussed in detail how Prabhavati Gupta had her own agency and she ruled on behalf of her minor son, the Vakataka prince, for 2 decades. Post Gupta period, there were a number of queens who used to rule in Kashmir, Odisha as well as Andhra. Then there was Princess Vijay Bhattarika who acted as the provincial ruler under the Chalukya king Vikramaditya I. Women were provincial as well as village administrators in the Kannad region, and the same can be said about the Andhra region. Women from aristocratic classes definitely enjoyed access to education and other privileges. However, the same cannot be said of the common women who still suffered some kind of deprivation as well as several hurdles in their path towards achieving equality. Now, having discussed with you these several aspects, I am sure you would now ponder over these points and you would also think that how modern day women are different and what all changes have come about. What are the new institutions that have helped in bringing about the positive change? Thank you.